Meuret from Meuret Grain Company in Brunswick is our marketing analyst this week. On Thursday, the USDA released its September crop report. The agency increased corn production for this year's harvest to 13.8 billion bushels, an 80 million bushel increase from last month. Part of the gain came thanks to Nebraska, which is forecasted to harvest 164 bushels per acre. That's a 3 bushel per acre increase from the August report. In soybeans, the USDA is estimating production at just less than 3.15 billion bushels, down 3% from last month. Average yield was lowered to 41.2 bushels per acre, with Nebraska projected to average 47 bushels per acre. After the release, John talked with us on the grounds here. We asked if he was surprised by any of the numbers.
You know, not really, Jeff. I think everybody expected to see the bean number a little smaller and the corn number just a touch higher, and that's what we got. The market, since that's happened, has really been lower in corn and higher on beans. Beans chopped around for the first hour and quickly moved higher as we're speaking here. So, no, not really, Jeff. I think there was some people hoping that maybe the corn number would drop a little lower, but the anecdotal yield reports thus far have been really good. And so it's early, very early, but I'm going to say the USDA didn't really have a lot of shocks today for anyone.
We'll go into corn in a bit. Let's start in soybeans because ending stocks are kind of the number that everyone's looking at. They dropped from 220 to 150. Whether or not that's true is one thing, but how do you look at those numbers?
You know, I think I think they make sense. You know, when they make that drop, I think the numbers behind that, Jeff, they took exports down 20 million bushel, which if you talk to an exporter, they're going to disagree today. Exports have been phenomenal. China's been a steady buyer. In the last 10 days, they've slowed down a little bit, but I wouldn't disagree with it at all. We know the crop shrunk, the dryness came at the wrong time of year, and we certainly respect the fact that demand is still there, give or take 20 million bushel. So,
what's your impression on how that crop looks, that soybean crop, as you get into Nebraska and Iowa, Illinois, Minnesota, that area?
Soybeans are tough. Visually, they look really good, but I think when you dig in the plants in those dry areas, you're going to find less pods than you like. One of the notes on the USDA numbers today, the pod weight was a little heavier than expected, which surprises a lot of people. Unless you pack on those late season rains and make a bigger bean, that pod weight's going to tend to be a little slower, or a little lower, excuse me. So it wouldn't shock me to see further declines in the bean yield.
Barring major disaster, this will be a record corn crop at 13.8 billion bushels. They've actually increased that production from the last month. That doesn't surprise you at all?
Not at all. I mean, it makes sense. We got the rain early. The genetics are better all across. I'm not shaken by that at all. I think there's some prevent plant questions yet. We spoke about that last time I was on. You know, there's certainly going to be some areas that are gone, and they'll make an adjustment in October. But overall, I don't disagree with the production number. I think you're going to have a record, and we forget what a record crop is. It's a big crop.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of supplies around this time next year. All right, tell me how things look in your area of northeast Nebraska.
Locally, very good. And, you know, I think the one major difference this year between last year is the bottom end, Jeff. I talk about it a lot, but the bottom end of the crop is so much better than it was a year ago. So if you're going to have the top yield be 250 and the bottom yield be 150, things are really good, and that's irrigated country. But anytime you can take the bottom end up, the primary acres, you know, those bottom acres really help lift things higher. So very good. And the bean crop, if you're irrigated, I think it's going to be excellent. This is good weather with plenty of sunlight and all irrigated water. So
your area of the country is probably one that's caught a few rains here in August as well.
We have. You know, you get to Brunswick and the northeast of there, very good. In fact, where you're from, Jeff's had one of the best spots in Nebraska this year. So I think you're going to have the best farm averages ever, and maybe not individual yields, but farm averages will be extremely well. So,
any combining that started up there yet?
We've seen a little bit of corn start to come off this week, very isolated. The wet corn guys are going to start to get cranked up this week and next week. I think the bulk of the harvest, even with this heat, is still 2 or 3 weeks away yet. So I would call this kind of a traditional year. Watch the weather. There's some models talking about a lot of precip coming in October. I think that's going to be a problem for a lot of people trying to go out and get the crop off. But overall, beans will still be late September and corn a couple weeks after that. So,
what does basis look like now in corn and beans, and how does it change as you go forward to that harvest?
You know, that's a good question. And corn and beans have both dropped in the cash market in the last month. It's been extremely tricky. And as we make this transition from old crop to new crop, you find the buyers backing off about 10 to 20 cents a day. And so there's been some large drops. From here on into harvest, my view is you continue to see supportive basis, inverted basis, and in other words, higher in October than you would be in November, and carries that into the end of the year. Because I think the farmer is going to be a reluctant seller. The crop's going to come off somewhat slow. Soybeans probably similar. You know, the pipeline needs the soybeans, and so meal today, switching gears a little bit, is still around $500 a ton. So when we get to new crop, it should be closer to $400 a ton. So as we make that $100 transition, I think that'll tell us a lot.
Where do you stand as we go into harvest here on beans? Are you bullish or bearish? And
I am bullish beans,
yeah.
you know, and I think everybody would agree with that. Beans look like they need to go higher. That spread at the moment is about 3 to 1, corn to soybeans. The highest it's ever been is 4 to 1, and I would guess we get there. It'll feel strange, but I think the goal of the market in the next 6 months is to ration bean demand and encourage the U.S. farmer to plant some more soybeans next spring. So we'll see what the South American farmer does, and if he reacts accordingly. But I would suspicion, you know, he's going to start planting soybeans in Brazil next week. We'll see what he does and if he expands acres down there.
Would you be aggressive at all to try and sell or contract forward next year's beans, depending on what South America does here? Because that forecast is a record crop down there as well.
It is a record crop, but I think the problem is the price today, corn versus beans for 2014, still points to corn. You need to move that. And so I think that happens when South America has a production problem, and they will at some point. Realized or unrealized, they're going to have a scare. And when that scare comes, I think that's what takes your no 14 beans higher, and corn perhaps will be $4.50 at that point. So it's too early to take advantage of that, but I would be vigilant over the next 3 or 4 months before they take their crop off for those opportunities.
All right, and in this year's, how aggressive would you be right now?
Beans are hard, and I think if you can get 13.5 or 14 cash off the combine, you sell them. Even though we're bullish, you know, that spread's only going to go so far. And if corn's at 4, let's say, you know, maybe beans only get to 14. And so be cautious. I think you got to be cautious and be aware that the risk is that corn holds you down. So independently, beans are very friendly, but together, tied with corn, it probably gets held back a little bit. So
you want to protect yourself at all around that October report after what we saw today? If there is any change, perhaps in the acreage next month, do you think that could be a shock to the market?
You know, the market's getting very comfortable with a 1.8 billion carry. And so what's interesting is even today, this corn number is not bullish in any means, but you've climbed back from the lows of 14, 15 lower to be down 10. And so I think one more month printed at a number about like this, you're probably going to just chop in here, and you might go down and touch the lows at 446 or wherever they were. But I certainly think the corn market's kind of going to get immune to the 1.8 billion carry. And so if that happens, maybe we can build a floor in here. So, you know, at these numbers, I would watch them closely, but I don't know that I'd panic sell any corn here.